Hey friends, so I wanted to do a quick IGTV video because I have this thing that's kind of going through my brain where I'm thinking about cognitive empathy, and I had someone in my car not too long ago, a wonderful person, Nancy, who we were talking about personal development, and she was asking me about my story, and she essentially asked me the question of how do you learn empathy, because she said that her son is having a little bit of trouble with sort of understanding that, and he's a little bit cold and lacks empathy, and she assumed when he was a kid that he had some version of Asperger's or autism, and I can totally relate to that feeling. you know I've felt throughout much of my life that I may have some sort of Asperger's or autism or something like that. And it wasn't really until I started learning Myers-Briggs and other personality models that I'm not that. I'm just someone that luckily has this clean slate of empathy and this ability to learn empathy from basically zero. It doesn't mean that I'm incapable of empathy. It's very different to look at it that way, like being incapable of empathy versus, not simply understanding it yet, right? Because I've always been a curious person. Ever since I was a kid, I've always asked questions about everything. I scrutinize. That's what I do. I'm good at that, right? That is one of my superpowers, is being able to scrutinize to quite the extent, right? And doing that as a kid wasn't always welcomed, wasn't always appreciated, and it looks like a lack of empathy. And essentially, one of the things we have to understand, first of all, is that empathy doesn't look the same for everyone. Empathy is a very fluid thing. I think we think of empathy as certain specific things because of social frameworks. We think of empathy as like, stopping whatever you're doing and being able to give someone love and attention whenever they need it. But we don't stop and think about our capacity for what we can actually give. Being empathetic would be giving the appropriate amount of energy when we can actually give it. So if I can do that for someone, I'm absolutely going to do that. I'm going to help them. But if I'm incapable in the moment, then I'd rather direct you to someone else. And I feel like that's a better expression of empathy than, sort of forcing otherwise, right? So this kind of leads back to the question that was proposed to me, which was, how do you develop empathy? And I think it really depends on how your brain works and how you choose to navigate life. I say choose in a loose sense. It's like a subconscious preference, because some of us are thinkers and some of us are feelers. Some of us have a natural emotional capacity for empathy, or at least we feel we do, right? Some of us feel that we understand other people's emotional states and that we can relate to them and we know what their needs are and we can adapt to those things. And others, again, don't so much. So in order to start to learn empathy and not quite manufacture it so much as, take a different route to learning how other people's brains work, is to first understand that emotions are information, information that helps you understand other human beings. And I think the common thing that I hear from thinkers and that I've experienced myself is this feeling that thinkers are ignoring emotions, or we think emotions are stupid, or they cloud our judgment and we don't want anything to do with them, right? And that can be a real massive challenge, because you first have to subvert that. You have to subvert that feeling that emotions don't matter and really understand intelligently that emotions are a part of the data equation. So for you to understand that emotions really help you to see the full picture of someone's experience so that you can more accurately help them or give them information or give them context or really learn how to navigate this relationship, you have to not dismiss the emotional aspect of that experience. And that can start with yourself. That can start with saying that thinking that emotions are stupid is an emotional response. So that's probably the first thing you can think about is just look at it that way, right? Like, you think emotions are stupid. All of the things that you think are stupid because of your thinking nature are all emotional responses. Think about that for a second. If you're saying, like, Okay, for example, the other night we were at this house church thing, which I don't like in participating in anything church related or religious related. And really, the bulk of the conversation is not religious at all. It was actually a lot of really interesting people, and I love being able to be a part of that, right? So being a part of that was absolutely amazing. But there are parts of it that, religion comes up, and that sparks something in me that typically gets me emotional. It triggers some sort of trauma within me when I am around too much of religious stuff, because religion and some stuff with my parents and some other stuff growing up basically dismissed my mode of thinking in order to, sort of continue a dissonance within the way that they thought. So for me, that created this frustration around religion, around all this other things. So in this house church situation, they brought up the example of sometimes the Bible has these really weird sort of verses or analogies, and they were talking about unequally yoked or something like that, some sort of egg metaphor. And I was like, that's just stupid. That doesn't make any sense. I don't get that, right? And the fact that something doesn't make sense to me triggers an emotional response that gets me frustrated. That emotion is frustration. I'm frustrated that they can't just be direct, that you can't just say what you're meaning by this, because there are so many opportunities for misinterpretation. And the context that they were explaining was exactly that, a misinterpretation of that knowledge, of that idea. So it became this idea that brought up this frustration in me, right? So acknowledging that it's frustrating for me is probably one of the most important first steps in acknowledging empathy in other people, because really empathy is about calibrating your emotional experience to other people's emotional experiences. So if you can calibrate yourself to your emotions, to your emotional experience, that's when you can start to be aware of other people's emotional experiences and give them space for it, right? That's another part of the concept too, is practicing holding space for someone else's emotional state and realizing that emotions don't necessarily live within the realm of logic. They don't have to, at least not yet, right? Emotions are sometimes just a spewing. They're a working through. It's like this idea of just like, this is just a raw cloud of stuff that's going on in my brain. And, it's like ones and zeros that don't yet have a home, right? And that's another way of thinking about it, is like, again, emotions are information. It's data, and data can exist as individual pieces. Like letters in the alphabet are data, right? So letters in the alphabet don't typically mean something by themselves. And sometimes when you think about emotions, sometimes someone's working through an emotional state that doesn't necessarily have an assignment to it, letters that don't yet have words. That's sometimes what emotions and empathy can be an aspect of, right? So empathy is understanding the bits and pieces and data, and understanding that someone could be just in the data stage and don't yet have a place where they can put it into information. So holding space for that is incredibly important, and holding space for that within yourself is important as well, because it's an exploration. It takes time to figure out how you can put those letters, that pieces of data, into words and translate them into something that is tangible, into something that is actionable, something that is usable, right? That takes time, that takes effort, that takes practice. So to dismiss emotion is to dismiss a complete other aspect of the human experience. And that is really, it's just not smart to do that. So as much as you think that you're a thinker and you're as intelligent as you think you are, dismissing emotion completely is missing 50% of the picture. And if you don't have 50% of information to work with, it's not very smart. So, that's just like a beginning step to developing empathy. So I appreciate you for listening to this. I'm going to put this on IGTV and on YouTube. If you hit the sort of the full screen button on YouTube, you'll watch it in full screen. Follow the dopamine.life, and you can hit the link in my bio to follow that. So appreciate you guys. Take care of yourselves and each other, and I'll catch you next time. See ya.